So I thought this could be an interesting idea for a series. If it sucks or doesn't get much numbers, I might not do it. We'll see how it goes. But I'll at least do a couple of these and see how see if people are interested in them or not. I figured, Kyle and I do our podcast where we preview every single team. And I figured, hey, I spent all this time creating the notes for it. Why not also kind of put it in a bite-sized video content thing right here for you to watch, and I can kind of get into more detail about some of this stuff as well, and just give my my thoughts on it as opposed to doing it in podcast form. And we'll see if you guys like it. Hopefully you do. So as always with a team, it comes down to the top two guys, and that's what you start off every single team with: is who's your quarterback and who's your head coach. That's always the first two things, because you need typically for those guys to be really good. Commanders don't really have it really good. It's not horrible either for either of them. So Ron Rivera, he was my 15th ranked head coach. So that, given my scoring system with head coaches, which is completely arbitrary, that's the one that's like I don't know how to really evaluate head coaches. So I just do, kind of a sliding scale of, 5 100ths of a win for every placement you move up. So for example, Ron Rivera is 15th. So he gets, a 10th of a win added to the Commanders. So that's how that works. So it's not like, a huge difference, but that's kind of where he is. He's a solid head coach right now. I do think there are some better, and I think there's some worse. So he's right kind of at smack dab in the middle. Carson Wentz also is a tier 3 quarterback, in my opinion. Again, that's how I evaluate all of this, is tier 1 through tier 5. So tier 3 quarterback for Carson Wentz, which is, quarterbacks matter a lot. Quarterbacks, there's just going to be a ton of potential value that you can get from a quarterback. That it's one position that a top 5 quarterback will get you nearly 4 wins. So there's so much potential for great there. Wentz, well, he has been a top 5 quarterback once, so maybe he can do that again. You can hope so, but realistically, probably not. Tier 3 is what he's going to be, but there's still value there. I mean, that still helps you. It's a lot better than what they had last year, which was probably tier 5 quarterback play. Next up is their wide receivers, and this is a very interesting situation, I think. Their wide receivers are good. I mean, they have a really good receiving core. I have this as tier 2, where a tier 1 receiving core gets you 3.32 wins. So tier 2, that's 2.61 wins. That's a lot of wins for your receiving core with Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel. No one's talking about Curtis Samuel. I'll be the one to pound this Curtis Samuel drum. He's really good when he's on the field. John Dodson, they drafted in the first round, who... What I like about this is, I talked about this on the podcast as well, being someone who can kind of just come in and be that third option and doesn't have to be a first or a second option as a rookie. You can just let him do what he does well and then kind of, figure that stuff out, which I think is cool because, there is always a question mark with rookies. Take Dimey Brown, for example, who seemingly was a very hyped up prospect. Again, relatively, not like he wasn't a top guy, but, some people really loved him. I think, like, Chris Sims had him as a top 3 wide receiver, if I remember correctly. So, like, some people loved Brown, and he didn't look great as a rookie. Now, there's still hope, there's still time, and the reality is, hopefully in this scenario, he can at least just do some things, because he was a deep threat guy, and with Carson Wentz's arm strength, maybe there can be some fun there. Cam Sims is also a solid player, and also I include tight ends in the receiving core. So Logan Thomas, who's a quality tight end as well, should definitely be able to come on and be a good third or fourth option on some of these plays. So for a receiving core, sometimes it's how good is your third player. They should at least have solid third players and good first and second players. So tier 2 receiving core for me. The offensive line is also tier 2, just like the receiving core was, where there's a lot of stuff to like about the offensive line. The tackles, Samuel Cosme, who was a second-round pick last year and played well, so I have no doubt he'll continue to play well. Also, Charles Leno Sr., who was he's been kind of a consistent top 20-ish tackle recently. He's kind of one of these guys who every now and then there's these veteran offensive linemen who just consistently play well, but no one gives them a big contract for whatever reason. He's kind of one of those guys, so I love those kind of signings. The interesting thing about this offensive line is the guards. So Angie Norwell and Trey Turner are 2 guys who both at times looked very good. They're both Pro Bowlers who haven't looked as good as of late, but have still been quality. They've still been solid offensive linemen. So there's still a high floor with them, but there's also potentially a high ceiling. So that's kind of the hope is, Norwell, who just came from the Jaguars after getting a big contract there. You also have Trey Turner, who just came from the Steelers, was formerly with the Panthers. So Those guys are interesting. Also, Chase Rollier. Again, these names are tough. I'm going to mispronounce names during these previews. It is what it is. Not a name guy here, but I'm doing my best. He's a really good center, though. So, offensive line, tier 2. And then, so for tier 2 offensive line, some people think the offensive line matters more than my system does, but the reality is offensive lines don't translate to wins as much as quarterback play or receiving play does. Still 1.72 wins added for our offensive line, though, being tier 2. Halfback room, I'm giving it tier 4 here. A lot of people would have it higher. Listen, like Antonio Gibson. I don't love Antonio Gibson. I like J.D. McKissick. I don't love J.D. McKissick. I like Brian Robinson more than most do, who was a third-round halfback. Still don't love him, though. So, do they have a top 20 halfback here? I don't think so. Again, the 20th halfback, according to PFF last year, was Austin Eckler. I'd take Austin Eckler over any of these guys, and you have to be top 20 to get to tier 3. So it's tier 4 for me, but they at least have depth, so I wouldn't be stunned if it ends up actually overperforming that. So tier 4 doesn't get you any wins. That's one of the positions where even tier 4 won't get you anything. You have to get at least tier 3, but that's why I have them there. So for their offense as a whole, I like their offense. It's actually tied for 5th best in football, but there's a bunch of teams like right around that 6 to 6.5 wins. 6.51 total wins for the Washington football team. That is at least in terms of their offense. Now let's move on to defense, where it all starts up front for the Washington football team. With the edge rushers, Chase Young, Montez Sweat, those are the two guys, really. And ideally, you'll get 1,000 snaps out of both of them. That's what you want. James Smith-Williams and Casey Toohill are fine depth guys. Smith-Williams can do some nice things, but, you want Young and Sweat out there. They're kind of what your defense is almost built around. Well, that in the interior as well is very good. Jonathan Allen, who's awesome, and Deron Payne, who's really good. So you have those two guys on the inside. They're top 4. For a Madden team, this is great, right? Because you want those top 4, which they have. You also drafted Mathis in the 2nd round. He could potentially do well. On top of this, linebackers, Cole Holcomb, who is solid. He's kind of just he should start. He shouldn't be a great starter. A solid number 2 linebacker who kind of been forced to be number 1 for them, I think is probably the best way to phrase that. You drafted Jamon Davis hoping he would be the number 1 linebacker. They drafted him in the 1st round last year and didn't look great. He needs to be a bit more patient at times, I think. He really will make his decisions quickly. So, that has its benefits. It definitely has its cons as well. I have a tier 2 pass rush and run defense for the Washington football team. Their pass rush was 6, and only the top 5 make tier 1. So it's right there. Maybe some depth would have allowed it to get to number 1, or get to tier 1, but still very good. There is a big drop off between tier 1 and tier 2 pass rush, though. So only 0.45 pass rush wins for them, just because pass rush doesn't actually translate to wins the way people think it does. If you look at the numbers, it doesn't. I did a whole video on this explaining this. People don't like that take, but it's what the data says. I trust data more than I trust just what people think. That's kind of how I view that. Run defense also tier 2, so that's 1.62 wins for the run defense. And now the coverage, which is kind of what this team all relies on, I think. The coverage is going to be what it comes down to. There's so much potential wins for coverage. In fact, coverage I have as in terms of this one group, the most important position in football, even more than a quarterback, which sounds surprising, I think, and it kind of is, right? But if you think about it, it kind of makes some sense because for a quarterback, it's the entire passing game as a whole. Some of those wins are going to receivers. Some of those wins are going to a quarterback. So the quarterback receiving group is still much more important than coverage, but coverage is more important than a quarterback or a receiving group. For Washington, I gave their coverage tier 3. So you have, for the corners, I think a lot of it comes down to William Jackson, who was really good when they signed him. Felt like a great move, a great upgrade, even with Darby playing well when he was last with Washington. He didn't play well. It was a new scheme for him. Hopefully he improves. You also still have Kendall Fuller, who did play well. Dana Johnson, who's solid, and Benjamin St-Juste, who, according to the comments, looks like he could actually, be a starter for them, even though we haven't seen much from him, but maybe he'll be a starter. Safeties are good as well. Cameron Curl, Bobby McCann, and then they drafted Percy Butler in the 4th round. And I already mentioned the linebackers. So it's tier 3. It has potential to get better with William Jackson going back to Cincinnati William Jackson. That's what you're hoping. But again, is the case with every single coverage unit, there's just such a question mark. So they're currently scheduled to get 2.06 wins for their coverage unit if it is in fact tier 3. But if it improves, it could end up being tier 1, which would add a couple of wins. And if it falls off a cliff, it could cost them a couple of wins. So very fascinated how this coverage unit works for them. But as a whole, that's where I have them, meaning that their defense currently gets 4.13 total wins. Add that on to the 6.51, and then you also have to add Ron Rivera's 1/10 of a win, and they did not get any wins from the kicking position with Joey Sly, who has a big leg. Maybe he'll figure it out. I don't know. But this gives them a grand total of 10.74 wins, which would put them 15th in football, but it would put them 7th in the NFC, meaning they would be the 3rd wildcard team. I do have the Washington Balls making the playoffs next year. So that's what I have. What do you guys have? Let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on all of this stuff? Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.